I'm Ben Meiselas from the MeidasTouch Network. A blockbuster day at the criminal trial where the Trump Organization is a criminal defendant. The former CFO Allen Weisselberg, who has pled guilty to 15 felony counts related to the underlying criminal conduct at issue in this case in Manhattan, testified. We also had the remaining testimony of the Trump controller, Jeffrey McConney, and then we also had Deborah Tarasoff, who was the accounts payable supervisor at the Trump Corporation, all testify, and none of the testimony was good for the Trump Organization. Let's break down what took place. Just as a reminder, this is the criminal trial where the Trump Organization is the remaining criminal defendant. Allen Weisselberg was also criminally charged in this case brought by the Manhattan DA. Weisselberg took a plea deal where he pled guilty to 15 felony counts. This case arises out of the Trump Organization providing improper benefits which were not reported to tax authorities for its top executives. So things like rent and private school and vacations and transportation and travel and all of these things were paid for by the Trump Organization. And then the Trump Organization would not declare it, nor would the individuals declare it. And so the Trump Organization is now on criminal trial for approximately $1.7 million in benefits, which were not reported to tax authorities that should have been reported. So in the opening statements, the Manhattan DA painted the picture that it was the highest levels of the Trump Organization was aware of this scheme. Donald Trump's lawyers, the Trump Organization's lawyers, and again, it's the Trump Organization, not Donald Trump, that is the criminal defendant in this case, made the argument that this was just Allen Weisselberg. Weisselberg acted alone, and this was a story of just a very greedy CFO who went rogue and no one else knew about it. But that's obviously rebutted by the testimony that took place. The first witness that was called, or first major witness called by the prosecution, was Jeff McConney, and McConney was the controller, or is the controller, of the Trump Organization. He got COVID, and so there was about a week or so break in the trial before he testified at the end of last week, and he wrapped up his testimony earlier this week. And there were two major moments of McConney's testimony, but it's also important to know that McConney was being a very hostile witness. He still works at the Trump Organization, and so he was being very evasive. I don't remember. But we really have, we should mention the Manhattan District Attorney's Office is like the A-team of prosecutors. Like, they're the best. By the way, from the MeidasTouch podcast show, Legal AF, the midweek edition, Karen Friedman Agnifilo used to be the number 2 person at the Manhattan District Attorney's Office, and we're so honored to have Karen as a commentator here on the MeidasTouch network. But, Karen has talked about on the MeidasTouch podcast, and others have said as well, the prosecutor who is doing the cross-examination, Susan Hoffinger, is incredible, like a superstar lawyer, and she did the cross-examination of Weisselberg, and they just have their A-team doing this trial. And so let's start off with McConney. In McConney's testimony, he had to be declared a hostile witness so that he could be cross-examined and not be treated as like a witness where you just have to ask direct questions. So the prosecution was able to cross-examine him once the Judge Juan Merchant, who's the presiding judge over the case, agreed that McConney was not being a cooperative witness, so he was declared a hostile witness. And then there was really two important things that came out of McConney's testimony. First, McConney had said that Weisselberg had told him that Trump was aware of the tax fraud scheme that's at issue in the criminal trial. And that's not hearsay because it's a statement against the party opponent, and Donald Trump is not going to show up. There's an exception to the hearsay rule where Donald Trump could show up and testify and defend himself. So we're not worried about it being an out-of-court statement being used for the truth of the matter asserted when it's about a party opponent. It's also a statement against pecuniary interests, so another exception to the hearsay rule. But without totally geeking out here, that testimony was allowed to come in. The other important McConney testimony that came in was that Trump's personal ledgers had notes in them, which were notes saying that Weisselberg was involved in, the scheme with Trump to get these tax benefits. And the notes were removed from the ledgers submitted to the grand jury, but from the other books that were turned over by Mazars, Trump's former accounting firm, those notes on Trump's ledger were there. So somebody, probably Trump, deleted from the ledgers the notations that basically evidence the tax scheme, which could be a possible obstruction charge that the Manhattan DA can bring as well. But those were two major points that were brought out. And it should be mentioned, too, that in order for McConney to admit that Weisselberg had told him that Trump was aware, first McConney said, I don't remember, I don't know, I don't recall. But then the prosecutors had prior testimony of McConney at the grand jury where he was given immunity and testified that he was aware that Weisselberg had said this. So in front of the jury, the prosecutor was able to impeach McConney, demonstrating, one, that McConney wasn't being forthcoming, and then also linking it directly to the highest rungs of the Trump organization. So that was McConney. The next witness that's worth talking about is Deborah Tarasoff, the accounts payable supervisor for the Trump Corporation. And she testified that Weisselberg had told her to delete his name from the descriptions on invoices in the firm's records that paid the private school tuition of his grandchildren. And so it showed that the highest levels of the Trump organization were aware, that Weisselberg was aware, and that they were trying to avoid this becoming taxable income. And also it just showed that everyone was trying to cover it up. And sometimes the cover up is worse than the underlying crime here. That's not necessarily the case, but the cover-up evidence is a guilty mind. So Deborah Tarasoff testified about these notations that demonstrated that these improper benefits were being provided to Weisselberg and other executives. Okay, now Weisselberg's testimony. Weisselberg's testimony, one thing to mention too about Weisselberg's testimony is, although Weisselberg pled guilty to the 15 felony counts, he could potentially serve either 15 years or 100 days in prison. So it all depends on if he testifies and tells the truth, what he previously told the district attorney's office, which was that Trump was involved at the highest level. The Trump organization senior executives all knew, and this was all linked to the very top of the Trump organization, the criminal conduct that's at issue. And that's what Weisselberg pled guilty to. Those were the 15 counts. So if Weisselberg tells the truth, his penalty is he has to pay back the benefits that he received. So he's fined about $2 million, plus he gets 100 days in prison. But if he lies or tries to be difficult and is not cooperative with the testimony here, he can serve 15 years in prison. So it's a big swing right there. But so far, Weisselberg has delivered for the prosecutors, and he talked about the scheme very forthcomingly. And he explained how his salary was adjusted lower, and it was adjusted lower so when he got all these other benefits like the apartment and the condos and the private school tuition and all these things, eventually totaling hundreds of thousands of dollars a year and millions of dollars over time, that those extra benefits would not be taxable. And so the prosecutors asked him, well, then why didn't you just get a raise? Why didn't you get more money? Well, if he got the raise would be taxable and you'd have to double or triple his salary to get the same amount to pay for the same benefits that the corporation basically paid for improperly. And Weisselberg just laid it all out. And Weisselberg said that he believed that Trump was aware or that he knew that Trump was aware. He also said regarding Jeff McConney, he basically rebutted what McConney said. And he goes, look, McConney had to have known what was going on. Anyone who has very basic financial understanding was aware what we were doing was completely improper. And so Weisselberg really, on his first day of testimony, set the roadmap for Trump's knowledge. Trump was aware, and that's important because when you're charging the organization, the argument being made by Trump's lawyers is that it was just Weisselberg went rogue and Weisselberg did all of this and concealed it from the company. And Weisselberg says absolutely not. Trump was aware. Everyone was aware. The accounts payable was aware. Accounts receivable was aware. The controller was aware. Everybody in the organization saw what was happening. And, it's ridiculous just to say I was doing this completely on my own. So that was the first day of Weisselberg testimony. Weisselberg will return to testify on Thursday. Things are not looking good for the Trump organization here. Now, you may say, well, what is the implications of the outcome of this trial on the Trump organization? Well, the Trump organization, if they lose, they're going to be fined, and they'll be fined, close to $2 million. But that's something that Trump can basically grift in a day. But the other important thing is that if they're declared a felon, it will potentially trigger acceleration clauses on their loans. Their loans can be called because once you're a felon, you would be violating certain covenants with lenders. So it could have that impact as well. And then the third thing to look out for here is that a lot of other potential criminal conduct is becoming unearthed, and it is possible that the Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg could later charge Trump directly with additional crimes that are learned from this criminal trial. One of them is obstruction of justice, with the fact that we're learning that the books that were handed over to the grand jury had notations that were deleted. That's just one example of many examples that could come out. Also, the more testimony that comes out about Trump's direct knowledge could also be potentially used for later criminal charges. Although Alvin Bragg kind of pulled back on the criminal investigation of Trump. Meanwhile, the New York Attorney General, Letitia James, though, is full force with her civil lawsuit against Donald Trump, seeking at least $250 million in damages. And she recently was granted a preliminary injunction whereby the Trump organization had to submit to an independent monitor. The independent monitor is retired Judge Barbara Jones. We did another video about it earlier. You can check it out about the independent monitor selection. But now the Trump organization will have a retired judge looking at all of their books and records to ensure that further fraudulent representations in statement of financial conditions and other statements made to third parties like lenders and insurers and taxing authorities doesn't take place, and also that the Trump organization doesn't engage in fraudulent conveyances. So that's what's going on in the New York criminal trial. Just gave you a little bit of an update on what's taking place in the civil trial by the New York AG against Donald Trump directly and Trump's adult children. We will, of course, keep you posted here on the MeidasTouch Network as more testimony comes out in this criminal trial. So until next time, I'm Ben Meiselas from the MeidasTouch Network. Hey, hit the subscribe button right now. We're on our way to 1 million subscribers. We just passed 700,000 subs, and we're getting close to 715, 716 already, and it's going up rapidly. It's free to subscribe, so please, if you can, subscribe. And in addition, please consider becoming a patron of the MeidasTouch Network. Go to patreon.com/MeidasTouch, patreon.com/MeidasTouch. There's lots of exclusive content there when you subscribe to one of the memberships there. Most importantly, though, you'll help grow this independent media platform. We are not funded by any millionaires or billionaires. In fact, we have zero outside investors. So I always get asked from people who watch this channel, what can I do to help grow this independent media platform? There's nothing like this out there. What can you do? If you go to patreon.com/MeidasTouch, we're almost at 3,000 patrons. Help us hit 3,000 there. It goes a long way to keep building this network. And it helps us just be 100% accountable to you. We don't have to worry about investors telling us what we need to do and how we need to research. Screw that. Until next time, I'm Ben Meiselas, and hit the subscribe button.
At MeidasTouch, we are unapologetically pro-democracy, and we demand justice and accountability. That's why we're spreading our message to Convict 45. That's right, gear up right now with your Convict 45 tees and pins at store.meidastouch.com. That's store.meidastouch.com.